So I am very pleased today to welcome Carrie Pond and Janine Stilson, both master gardeners. Janine has been a member of the Edibles Guild for the last 4 years. She spent time growing up on her parents' almond orchard in the heat of Yolo County and has been a lifelong gardener of edibles ever since. She is a contributing writer to Backyard to Belly and is presented at the Indian Valley Organic Farm and Garden. Carrie Pond is also a UC Marin Master Gardener. She is involved with projects at the Indian Valley Organic Farm and Garden and our Edibles Guild. She has spoken on how to harvest your fruit and vegetables and is also a contributing writer for Backyard and Belly. Welcome.
Thank you, Linda. Well, it's delightful to be here with you all on this beautiful Friday afternoon. I think we're going to get some rain this weekend. Oh, by the way, if we tell any jokes or anything, even though I can't see you, I'm going to assume you're chuckling along with us. And we're going to talk today, of course, about preparing for your spring planting. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today are things that you can consider for next planting, since some of the things would ideally be started in the fall. But the benefit of talking about it now is to really to get you thinking about how you can prepare your garden year round for a bountiful harvest in the spring and summer. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, great. Carrie, does it look good? Or yep. Is it up there? Okay, great. Okay, so there's a nicely prepared garden bed. And here we go. And as Linda was kind enough to mention, Carrie and I are Marin Master Gardeners. We are volunteers, non-paid members of the University of California Cooperative Extension, doing research and helping to provide answers and information, science-based information to the public. Oops, sorry, hold on. Okay, so what we'll cover today, I think, Carrie, I think this is where you step in, yes?
Yeah. So we'll talk again, Janine mentioned that we're past the fall and the winter. We are going to briefly talk about those things, so it will help you on the upcoming planting for next year. But we get into spring and there's still time to do some of this for spring. So if you have questions, again, put them in the chat box as we go along. But we'll cover cover crops for the fall, winter planting plan, tool care, dividing and pruning your perennials, and repairs that you need to make to your infrastructure prior to planting. We'll also talk about spring, indoor seed starting, soil testing, double digging, amending, direct sowing, and planting. So we're doing some introductions here. We're going to use some little emojis to help us along. We have Daisy and Christopher, who are going to be planting a little bit differently, and we'll go through what each of them are doing. So cover cropping, Daisy's going to put in a cover crop. This is something you actually plant in the fall. It increases the nutrients of your soil. It helps protect the soil from erosion, keeps out weeds. It helps to break up your compacted soil if you have that. It definitely is aesthetically better than the bare ground, so it looks good. And it can also attract beneficials to your garden. What do you plant as a cover crop? This is a beautiful picture of Janine's raised bed in her garden where she's planted vetch. Grasses and legumes are a big one to plant. That includes winter wheat, oats, alfalfa, rye, annual clovers, vetch, as in the picture here, fava beans, bell beans, and peas. Legumes are great because they release nitrogen from the roots into the soil and help your spring plants once you plow everything under. Cover crop tips. Make sure to use annuals instead of perennials. When you're buying your cover crop, this is really important. You don't want a perennial that is there year after year. You just want something that's going to grow annually that you can turn back into your soil. And when you buy your cover crops seed, make sure to use the proper inoculant to coat the legume seeds before you plant. And when you buy your seeds, you can usually get the inoculant at the same time. They'll know what should be going with what, and you can make sure to ask them. LaBallesters in Santa Rosa is a good place that carries a lot of cover crop seeds and mixes, and they can help you with your inoculant as well.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about lasagna composting, which is another tool to prepare the ground for planting. And this is something that you would do in the fall or winter. And so Krista Fern, we like to call him Fernie, is going to try this lasagna composting. So it's a really flexible process, which is nice, and the timing isn't so particular. Both of the preps for your bed in the winter or fall, cover cropping and lasagna composting can be done in ground or in raised beds. So it can be done a little bit at a time. So what you would do is you would lay out the area that you're going to use. Now, lasagna composting is particularly helpful in areas where there hasn't been a garden bed there before. So if you have a path or a heavily treaded area that you're going to turn into a planting area, this would be an ideal place to do lasagna composting. So what you do is you clear off the area, you scalp the grass or the vegetation down to soil level, and then you pop or you loosen the soil underneath with a spade, or if you don't have not a spade, excuse me, a fork, a garden fork, down, and then just pop it up and then go to the next spot, pop it up. So you're not disturbing the layers, but you're aerating the whole area. And then you're going to want to remove all the pernicious weeds out there, like any blackberry, bindweed, Bermuda grass, morning glory, which is a particular one for me. And then you're going to cover the area with overlapping newspaper or cardboard. Now, if you're like me, newspaper is tricky to come by these days, but because of all the things that we have sent to us, we've got tons of cardboard out there. So that will work also. Of course, it's a little sturdier, but it will also work. And then you add, in the fall, you can add fresh manure or aged manure. But if you're doing this later into the winter or early spring, you'd want to use aged manure. And then you layer with leaves, straw, bark, or another carbon material or brown layer. And then you add a layer of nitrogen, so kitchen scraps, green produce scraps, manure again, grass clippings, one of my favorites. And then you keep layering your compost up. And so you're going to end with carbon. You wet each layer, and then you wait. Now you're going to build it up higher because it's going to shrink down. But what you're creating is this beautiful kind of layer of humus, nutrients, air, water, that'll be ready for spring. So like I said, add as many layers as you like. And if it's not completely cooked or ready, and it won't really cook because this is a cold process as opposed to a hot compost, you don't have to worry. You can cover it with 2 to 3 inches of compost and plant anyway. Okay, so before we move on, just some additional nitrogen sources. If you want to add coffee grounds, manures, alfalfa pellets, fresh weeds that aren't the pernicious ones, vegetable scraps, grass clippings. Some other carbon ideas are sawdust, leaves, of course, corn stalks, pine needles, peat moss, and wood chips.
And everybody's favorite thing is pulling weeds. And here's Daisy pulling weeds. Weeds are really important to get out because they take the nutrients from your plants. And people may think that it just looks bad, but it's worse than that. It actually really stunts your plants because weeds take up a ton of nutrients in the soil. So make sure to keep the beds clear. Containers obviously don't have that problem, but if you plant in ground or plant in raised beds, really important to get those weeds out. Okay, again, we're still in the winter time here, and what better way to chase away those winter blues than by getting your seed catalogs in the mail. Here's some choices if you guys don't know where to get seed catalogs. There's some great local and West Coast suggestions here. Some from Oakland, Santa Cruz. We've got Sustainable Seed Company from NorCal and Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, which has their store up in Petaluma. And they actually do the Heirloom Festival every year up in Santa Rosa. A great place to go and really learn about planting. And they have everything under the sun there that you could possibly know. And I don't know that they're going to do it this year. It's usually at the end of the summer. So it's always worth checking. Seed catalogs have been around for a very long time. As you can see here, back in the 1800s, we've got seed catalogs from all the different companies, and a lot of them here local in San Francisco. And so here's some pictures of some old seed catalogs and seed packets. People have been doing this for a very long time. So the planting plan. Here we have a woman looking at her March Madness brackets for anybody who's a basketball fan. We're a little past that now, but her brackets are arugula, kale, asparagus, and heirloom tomatoes for her Final Four. So the biggest thing to do is really plant what you like to eat. And if you're planting something else, it's not really worth the time and effort that it takes. So think about what you really like to eat fresh from your garden. Make sure to do a site assessment. You want to make sure that you're in a place where you've got enough sun. Most vegetables need between 6 and 8 hours of sun per day. You want to be in a place that's not going to shade them out too much, whether that's from a structure or from other plants. And you want to be ideally in a place that's out of a lot of wind. Those are really the important things. The other thing is your water source. Make sure that you're close to water. Obviously, we're coming up on drought restrictions here in Marin, so that is something to consider as well. You may not want to put in a big garden this year or something that's going to be highly water intensive, so something to think about. Access to your space, make sure that it's not difficult to get to. If it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And your return on investment. Some things that you grow at home are just going to taste a lot better than what you can get at the grocery store. And tomatoes is usually one of the things on that list. Your homegrown tomatoes just taste a lot better. You can get the good ones at farmer's market, but the grocery store, sometimes it can be difficult. You need to think about whether you're going to do seeds or transplants. It's a little past seeding right now. So transplants are everywhere. You get the little small things that are probably 3 to 6 inches at this point, and they're everywhere in the nurseries. They're at farmer's market as well. And those are really easy. You don't have to worry about a seed failing you. Transplants are usually pretty good to go. You need to think about how many crops you want to put in your space, and if you're going to rotate your crops. Some things will go early in the season and they die out, and then you put your next crop in. So you need to think about kind of your succession planning with your crops as well. Decide whether or not you want to do perennials or annuals. That's a really big consideration. Your perennials will be staying in your garden for many years, so you need to think about that in terms of your planning. Again, crop rotation, some of that's going to be disease related. Your Solanaceae family, you don't want to plant in the same place more than once a year, kind of rotate those out every 3 years or so. And consider any pollinators that you want to attract to the garden. That's really important to make sure your plants get pollinated properly. Where to plant? Well, Daisy is going to do raised beds. They're more expensive. You have to get all of your materials together to construct them. It's a little bit more work up front, but you have a lot of benefits when you have raised beds. This is a picture of Janine's garden. She has a beautiful raised bed there that's full of beautiful plants. You've got a lot more control with the raised bed. You have less weeds. It's great for drainage because it's off the ground, and it's also great for gophers if you plan properly. And that usually includes putting some sort of hardwire cloth or chicken wire along the bottom when you construct your bed. That way they can't come up from underneath and get your plants. Christopher is planting in the ground. It's very easy if you've got good soil and drainage is good and you don't have tree roots. A lot of people do have tree roots in their garden, and again, that's going to compete for your resources for your plants, and it's a little difficult to dig around your tree roots as well. Containers are another really easy way to go. They're portable, they're flexible. You can use them in all kinds of spaces. You can move them into the sun if you're in a site that doesn't have great sun all day. It takes up a lot less space. They do take more water. Containers will dry out a lot more quickly than things that are planted in the ground. So that's something you really need to keep an eye on. Make sure it's the right size for the plant that you're putting in. You don't want to use too small of a container for a plant that's going to get really big. And make sure you've got drainage holes. There are a lot of containers that get sold that don't have holes in the bottom. They're more decorative. So you need to make sure that you do have those drainage holes put in there. And for a lot of plants, they need supports. So you need to put appropriate supports in so they don't tip over. Indeterminate tomatoes being one of those. And here's a picture of an old car full of plants, a very creative way to use a container garden. So this is on the Master Gardener website. It's recommended container depths for all your different plants. This is really important to go through here to make sure that you're not putting a plant that needs a deep container in one that's shallow. You're just not going to get the production out of it that you're hoping. Make sure that your containers are really clean. You can use 1 part of bleach to 9 parts of water to clean out those containers. Again, drill holes in the bottom. You can cut a piece of screen to cover the holes up. This is important because you don't want your soil washing out through the holes. Again, you lose your soil and then you make a mess of your patio as well. So here's kind of a picture there. This container did not have holes in it. Those were drilled in. That's why they're not even. And you need to make sure that you've got enough to have the appropriate amount of draining. So here's some vegetable varieties for container gardening. Again, you can find this on the Master Gardener website, but here's some varieties that work really well that don't need to be necessarily planted in the ground. If you're going to be limited to container gardening, this is really a great list to use. And especially if you're using things like tomatoes, there are specific ones that do a lot better in containers than others. So a great list. Again, this is on the Master Gardener website. Here's the link down below. If you go to our website, you can go over to the edibles tab. It's the very last one when you're looking at it. And then scroll down to planting calendar. And this is going to tell you when to plant each type of vegetable, ideally. And if you go through, it's a little hard to read on the screen, but I put it up so you know what to look for. Or you can screenshot it and take a look at it that way too. But again, if you want to do seeding, you want to do planting transplants, this list is really it's invaluable. So tool care, this is not something a lot of people think about, but it really does make a big difference. Cleaning and sharpening your tools is really important. The tools work more effectively. They're a lot easier to use and they last a lot longer. So we'll go through a couple steps here on how to clean your tools. So yes, you do have to take your pruners apart if you want to do this properly. You can do a quick and dirty job without taking them apart, but to really be thorough and make sure you get all that grime out of there, do take them apart. You can clean it with mild soap and water mix. I usually just get a soapy bucket of water and let things soak in there for a while and use a scrub brush to scrape off some of the gunk. You can use steel wool or a wire brush to remove the rust, some of the caked on soil and dirt, and sap. Sap is a big one. If you want to go the eco option for rust, you can soak your hand tools for a few hours in a strong black tea that's cooled off, and that helps remove the rust as well. Alcohol is another really great thing to use to get off some of the stubborn stuff and the sap. And you can just soak some cotton balls or a rag in some alcohol and just scrub it right off. Make sure you dry everything thoroughly. It's a really important piece of it. So here's some Felco pruners. That's pretty common. A lot of people have Felcos. Essentially, you can see these are in really bad shape. I went and looked around for some that looked really bad, so we have a good before and after picture. So you need to take the screws and bolts off, take the spring off as well. So when you take everything apart, you'll be shocked at the amount of dirt and gunk that actually falls out when you remove everything. And this is what it looks like when it's all taken apart. There are not that many pieces. It's not difficult to do. But again, you'll see the difference. Here's some ARS pruners, another popular type. They all come apart a little bit differently. This one's got a different spring mechanism in it. When I took the spring out of this, look at all the dirt that's on that towel. That all came from those little tiny holes where the spring was inserted, and you never would know that that's in there. But if you use your tools a lot in the garden and you lay them down, they are going to get dirty. Once these things were cleaned out properly, it made a huge difference in terms of how it worked. So sharpening your tools, another really important thing to do. If you've got gloves and eye protection, use it. If you have a vise, you can use that as well. I don't have one and I can sharpen mine without a problem. Pruners and loppers, you can use a diamond or a carbon file or a whetstone. This is a diamond jewel stick that's pictured here. Each side has a little bit different grit on it. So as you turn it, you get a finer and finer grit. And it's a really great tool to use. You can sort of prop it up like this and just sharpen it. It's super easy. Bypass pruners have one beveled edge. So you file it at the same angle that it's already been, comes from the factory with a certain angle on it. Make sure to use that same angle. And you only go in one direction. You don't go back and forth. Anvil pruners can be sharpened on both sides. So those are totally fine. Do both sides of those. Shovels, hoes, axes, and spades can be sharpened with a mill file. And we've got a photograph on the mill file as well, so you can see what that looks like. Here's a bypass pruner and sharpen it on that blade. Again, you want to have it at that proper angle. The photograph on the top right shows that angle that that blade's on, and you want to go in one direction to sharpen it. And the photo at the bottom shows it after it's been sharpened, and it's a big difference. And it's not that difficult to do. You maybe take, depending on how dull your blade is, you may take 5 to 10 passes on it, and it makes a really big difference. Your shovels, your hoes, your axes, and spades. Here's a mill file. This is a lot rougher. This has just a really big grit on it. Make sure not to take too much off. You can make your hoes and shovels quite brittle if you make that edge too sharp. So just kind of take some off until you feel like you get some sort of an edge on it, and don't keep going because you don't want it to chip off on you. Make sure to hang your tools up. Don't let them sit on the floor. Here's a shovel that's hung up properly. When they sit on the floor, that's where they end up getting rusted and damaged. And then you have to do sharpening a lot more often. And you may not think that sharpening your shovel makes that big of a difference, but if you do it and then you use it afterwards, you'll notice it's just a lot easier to use. So a lot less wear and tear on your body. Rust, by the way, is a result of oxygen and water reacting with the metal. That's where your rust comes from. So oiling tools, another really good thing to do, lubricate everything. If you want, some people use WD-40, some people use machine oil. The eco choice here is linseed oil. Boiled linseed oil, you can get that almost anywhere. Wipe down and spray all of your joints, all of your blades as well. Let it soak in there for about 15 minutes and then wipe off the excess. Oil the metal as well as the handle. If you have a wood handle, go ahead and put the linseed oil on that too, after you've sanded it, and we have a photograph on that too. Reassemble your pruners after everything is completely wiped down and it's dry. Don't put things back together when they're still wet. So here's your wooden tool handle. Here's a before picture on the left. It's been sanded down in the middle there with kind of a medium grain grit sandpaper just by hand. And here it is after it's been oiled. So it's a lot better. You're going to keep away all your splinters. If you're using gloves, obviously that's going to help. But if you're using your bare hands, you'll really thank yourself for having sanded everything and oiled it down. And it makes it last a lot longer too. And Christopher, he needs to do more weeding. So there we are doing more weeding. Weeding is something you're going to have to do throughout the whole process. So really important thing to do. Pruning. Here is a photograph of water sprouts on a plum tree. The water sprouts are the ones that go straight up and down. Those are very non-productive branches and just take away from the tree actually producing fruit. So you want to cut down all of those water sprouts. It's real easy before the leaves go to see, the leaves go on, but to see where the water sprouts are. Once the leaves come on, it's difficult to find. So this is a really good thing to do before things leaf out. January is a great time. Your dormant and deciduous vines, shrubs, and grasses to prune those back. Your blueberries, raspberries, and blackberries should all be pruned as well. Those should all be handled differently. So you can look at the Master Gardener website under the pruning and these specific fruits and vegetables, and they will specifically tell you what you need to do for each of those. Fruit trees also should be pruned back, your herbs. Again, all your suckers take out, water sprouts take out, and any of your shrubs, trees, and vines or grasses that are going to shade your edible garden out, make sure to prune those back as well, because you want to get as much sun as you can on this new plant. You need to wait to prune out frost damage, especially on your citrus trees, until after the last frost. And that way you'll know exactly what you're dealing with. While you're doing this, check for aphids and pests and make sure that you jump on those before they get out of control. Edible perennials need to be divided. Your perennial veggies and fruit include artichokes, asparagus, blueberries, horseradish, raspberries, and rhubarb. Herbs, a lot of people have a little herb garden or an herb container. Again, you can divide your chives, your mint, your sage, your tarragon, thyme. Here's a picture of some mint that needs to be divided. It's kind of overgrown its area. Mint can be very invasive, so be very careful where you plant it. Most people plant them in containers so they don't get out of control. This is planted between the wall and flagstone patio. It's about a 6-inch gap there, and it stays very much in control there, but otherwise they'll go everywhere. So watch out for your mint. Dividing perennials, make sure that you clean your tools first. You'll use a shovel, a fork, a trowel, and maybe even pruners. You want to sterilize everything with a bleach solution or alcohol. If something is diseased and you use it on a plant and take it to the next plant, you can transfer diseases very easily that way. So make sure you clean everything. Choose a shady spot on a cool day. Make sure that your plants are not water stressed. Know what root structure you're dealing with, whether you've got tubers or bulbs, rhizomes. Pull those apart at the breaks or cut them if you need to. If you have large plants, use a shovel or fork. You can see the 2 forks here in the photograph that are back to back. It's really easy to pull those apart that way to lift them out of the soil, but make sure you dig under the roots if at all possible. For root systems that are entrenched, you may just have to split the plant from the top right down the middle. It's usually the easiest way to do it. Shake off the loose soil, rinse off your roots, remove and clip out any dead growth or dead roots, and keep it moist until you replant it, and then water it thoroughly. That's going to be your best choice for getting something to live. You want to check in your repair, your cages, your trellises, and your beds. This is what Daisy's doing here. We have some tomato cages on the left. Make sure those are all in good working order before you put them in the ground. Difficult to repair those things after the fact. The middle picture is another bed in Janine's garden, and she's got her supports there all ready to go. And then on the right-hand side is a container with support in it for, those are actually peas. And those supports sometimes can fall over when it gets windy. So I always try to attach them to something so they're not going to tip over with the wind. You don't want to lose your plant that way. And check and repair your irrigation before you plant. Make sure your emitters are all clear, they're not clogged up. That's a small little emitter on the left-hand side, really easy. You can change the tops on those if they get really bad. And then here's an in-ground emitter system here with the lines, the irrigation lines. Make sure those are all working properly before you put your garden in. And then, did we forget to mention, pull weeds? Here's Janine pulling weeds.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. And okay, so spring is here finally. You've done all that wonderful prep, and here we are. It's spring, actually. Here we are. And our gal Daisy has decided to get a new do, because we need to do that once in a while. And then we start to dig in. Okay, so in early spring, you're going to cut in your cover crop. And when I say cut in, we're not disking like we imagine in old farming, not old farming, but recent farming practices, because those are changing constantly. Better practices are coming around all the time. But anyway, we'll cut your cover crop at soil level. Now you can either leave the chopped up tops on the soil, or you can add them to your compost. Here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to pull them out because those nitrogen pockets and pods are on the root structures in the ground. So they stay there. You cut at soil level, leave the tops on, and or else put them in your compost like I'd mentioned. If you want to dig them in, you take your shovel and you just maybe take that cut up top cover crop just a couple of inches and just turn it over. So really what you have is almost like a stew of dirt and green matter on the top, and then just leave it just like that. And you're really preparing things, preparing the ground for a great start. So here's the vetch, and then there's fava in the second picture there. This is a picture, what is this? This is a type of clover that I had cut down. Every once in a while, I feel like going rogue, and so there's some garlic growing on the right side there, but mostly this is a bed that has a cover crop in it, cutting it down to soil level. I'm going to mix it in a tiny bit and then let it kind of cook there for a couple of weeks. Okay. So additions to your soil after you've either put in a cover crop or done your lasagna composting or neither of those things, we talk about additions to the soil. It's a continuing necessity. Compost, of course, is the number one thing we talk about adding to your soil. You could put it on top. Compost is one of those wonderful things that if you leave it on top, it's considered a mulch. If you mix it into your soil, it's considered an amendment. Aged manure, one of my favorite things to add to the soil, and other vegetable or animal matter to help enrich things. Okay, so while you're letting either your cut cover crop or your lasagna compost or even just your manure, after you've kind of mixed with your beds a little bit and you're in a little bit of a waiting time, this is a perfect time to start your seeds indoors. Now, Carrie mentioned, and rightly so, that it's a little late to start your seeds indoors, not for all things. Some of the more heat-loving things can be started now. But if you want to give it a go, clean some containers if you're reusing some. You want to soak your seeds. I always get such better results when I soak my seeds in half. I take a wet paper towel, I put the seeds in between them, and then I put that in a dish and I keep it very moist for at least 24 hours. Then you take those seeds, you plant them at the suggested seed depth that you're dealing with. And then if you have a very cold house, you can take, once you've planted your seeds in your favorite planting mix, you can take those trays, like in the picture here, and set them on a heating pad or in a sunny location for them to pop up. It's so satisfying to see little things pop up out of the soil, whether it's indoors or outdoors. It's just one of the miracles of life. Okay, so now here's something that I tell people to do on a regular basis, and I do at a regular basis. It is so helpful, and I did it this year. This is the soil kit that I got as a very beginning Master Gardener. It is available for purchase for around $20 on the Master Gardener site, and you get a wonderful picture of what your soil looks like. We think we know. I tried to plant something in a bed that I had always done kind of all the right things in, and then I tested the soil and it didn't have any nitrogen in it. And that's because as wonderful as compost is, the levels of different nutrients are all over the map, or can be, in especially homemade compost, which is what I do. So we think we know, check anyway, and see then what specific amendments are going to help you be most successful. Okay. So double digging, to dig or not to dig. It's one of these things. So let me talk about, again, the reasons why we wouldn't necessarily want a double dig. Okay. So the trend, and has been for a while, to be patient with our soil. Planting what will grow and piling organic matter on top to repair the soil and fix any problems and stabilize the ecosystem and all that. Don't fight it, enable it, right? Working as a partner with our soil. So root systems, and the reason this is, and the reason you wouldn't want to mess up the soil is because root systems spread out to collect nutrients while deeper roots go down to get the water, right? And so if you mix that all up, you're taking the nutrients that the plant would gather close to the top and you're mixing them with the lower level, and the deep water tap roots are not the roots that would suck up those nutrients. So, and also loose soil sinks ecosystems because it's more susceptible to erosion, wind and rain. We unearth weed seeds. I think weed seeds get unearthed no matter what. So, and we also, not necessarily the home gardener, but the commercial gardener releases carbon into the air, and our goal should be to sequester it in the plant life instead of releasing it. And frankly, double digging is hard work. Okay, so in favor of double digging, the reasons we would consider it is because we use our garden beds, our edible beds really, in ways that aren't exactly natural, right? So they're intensively managed. We're trying to get as much as we can out of our produce and have our beds really work for us. So we ask more than a natural system would. So double digging can help the soil recover from our annual demands. And done well, double digging soil should remain in its appropriate levels. So the subsoil, the soil, the humus, and the organic layer. Oops, sorry, I meant to go up like this. So you've got your subsoil, soil, humus, and organic matter, organic litter. Erosion is decreased if it's done correctly, and the topsoil is revived, and drainage is increased, and you're not doing it every year. So if you do it right, especially in a bed, the first time you're using that bed, or if you have tree roots around, this is particularly helpful. Now, let me show you a video on how to do it right, the right way to double dig. So we're going to watch a quick video. Let me stop the share and let's go. Oh, actually, I do want to keep the share here. And can you see that, Carrie? Is that okay? All right, so here we go. And the volumes.
Hi, I'm Tricia, an organic gardener. Soil preparation is so important in organic gardening. And today I want to talk about double digging. This is a technique that was invented by French market gardeners in the 19th century. The double digging technique involves loosening the soil to about double the depth of the head of a garden spade. Double digging for initial soil preparation really does a good job if your soil is compacted. But if your soil is nice and loose and loamy, you don't want to double dig because that will just disturb the earthworms. To double dig, you'll need a large tub or a wheelbarrow, a spade, and a digging fork or a broad fork. Fertilizers and compost can be added at this time too, especially fertilizers with phosphorus, which moves very slowly through the soil. Double digging is hard work, but it's really the best way to loosen your soil. And it doesn't create hard pan like rototilling can. And remember, you don't have to double dig your whole garden, just the planting area. Before you double dig, make sure your soil is dry enough. To check soil moisture, dig down 6 inches. Grab a handful of soil and squeeze it together. If the lump you make can be crumbled easily, the soil is dry enough to double dig. If you double dig while your soil is wet, you're going to do more harm than good, so just wait until it dries out. Mark out your bed with stakes and strings. That way you won't do more work than you need to. We're going to dig a trench. It's going to be the width of the bed, and it's going to be no smaller than the width of the broad fork. It's going to be 12 inches deep. Then we're going to put the dirt into the bucket. Okay, now for the easy part. We're going to grab the broad fork and we're going to loosen up the soil underneath the soil we just dug out. Oh, this soil is so nice and loose. Now's the time to add the fertilizer and now a little bit of compost. I'm going to dig the second trench. The topsoil that I dig up from the second trench is going to replace the topsoil from the first trench. Continue this pattern until you get to the last trench. When you're finished trenching, just add all the soil from the first trench into the last trench. So now just water your beds a little bit to let the dirt settle, and you're ready for your French intensive garden and to grow organic for life.
Okay. Okay, so that is a quick and dirty description of the right way to double dig. Okay, so all of these things are tools to create a aerated soil that's full of goodies. So we have our lasagna compost, we have our amendments. Additional ways to aerate the soil would be to add some organic matter, some inorganic matter. Here are some examples: coffee grounds, compost, all that stuff. And inorganic, which include dolomite, green sand, gypsum, sand, and some perlite, some other things like that. But this little fellow here in the picture is probably our number one helper in the garden to aerate our soil. Okay, so amending with compost.
Janine,
Yeah.
can I interrupt? I have the video up on my screen.
Oh, you do?
Mhm.
Okay. Let's see. Let me see. Let me stop share. And let me go back to here.
Yep, we're good now.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, so amending with compost. This is something we can do every year. It helps to make sure, like Trish in the video was saying, avoid compaction from working with your soil when it's too wet. We don't have that problem right now. Everything is quite dry. But here's a rule of thumb. If you have a nice big pile of compost, you're going to work 25% of the distance. So if you have 8 inches of soil, you're going to mix in 2 inches into the first 2 inches. Does that make sense? Let me make sure I got that. So 25% of the planting depth, 2 inches of organic matter worked into the top 8 inches is what I meant. Does that make sense, everybody? I'm imagining everyone is really, yes. Okay, so manure, and then you can work in manure, and then you can also, of course, we recommend putting mulch on top, especially this year to keep the moisture in, since we're being really conscious of the water usage. So our little friend down here is not wearing the mask because of COVID. It's because the compost is really stinky. Here we go. Okay, so take a look around the garden for pests. If you've got pest problems, join the club. When Carrie was talking about lining the beds with hardware cloth or gopher cloth, I went to my bed that had some beautiful red onions in it just yesterday, and 2 of the red onions had beautiful tops, and they were all withered and drying out. And so I went over to them and I picked the top right up, and the whole bottom was gone. And so there's a hole in my hardware cloth, and I'm going to try to fix it tomorrow, and to see if we can save any of those onions, but I have a feeling they're goners. And my little friend here, my little black and white friend, was almost like a rototiller through the garden last year. And I went and looked at it, and the cover crop and everything was completely torn up because she was looking for some yummy things. So the top 20 problems in Marin. If you have any of these problems, you are part of the group. So ants, aphids, earwigs, scale, snails and slugs, thrips, yellow jackets, deer, gophers, raccoons, rats, and skunks. And then the top, let me see what I can take. Okay, so the top diseases that we have here, malaria, it's also oat root fungus. We have a mushroomer in our group, and actually the fruiting bodies of that particular disease is edible, from what I understand, but that's a whole other presentation. But that causes major roots and the trunk near the ground to die. So it can persist in the soil for decades. So that's one of the things we want to be aware of. Fire blight, peach leaf curl, powdery mildew, and rust. So be on the lookout for all those things. Okay, so direct sowing. We're getting to, let me check on the time. Okay, so we're very, very close, if not there already, for ground temperature for our direct sowing seeds to be successful. So that's what we say mean when we say timing for success. So make sure that the temperatures are consistent. Look at your seed packet. All those seeds that Carrie talked about earlier, those beautiful pictures, varieties galore. It's an economical way to plant your fruits and vegetables, because one seedling is about the same price as a seed packet. So just follow directions on the packet, irrigate deeply, and then do any thinning techniques that are required. I had a neighbor who put in cucumbers, lemon cucumbers, and she made a ring of seeds around a trellis, and they all pop up and they look gorgeous, and she couldn't stand to thin them, so she didn't. So she had a jungle of vegetation and hardly any fruit, because everything was competing just to grow. So I know it's painful. Thin, and so you'll have a better result in the end. Okay, so here's a squash plant coming up. Here's some beans coming up. I have most of my garden on an automatic watering system, but one of the beautiful things about hand watering is that it makes you get out there on a regular basis. I do go out there on a regular basis, and you can actually see things growing, especially in the summertime. Tomatoes can grow 6 inches in one day. Beans can also grow in one day. And this is probably the joy and the magic of gardening, is seeing the difference day after day when you plant things, and just how enjoyable it is. Here's a big mess. This is a garden box that needs some serious weeding and cleanup. I think this is Carrie's.
No.
Okay, so now that your soil is ready, now that you've done everything that we've kind of talked about before, Carrie mentioned the seedlings. It's a veritable candy store in nurseries right now, whether it's flowers, whether it's fruit like strawberries, herbs, vegetables. Now is the time to go in there and do some retail therapy. One of the things also is that 99.9% of the time, any seedlings that you get in a nursery are already hardened off. And so if you had started some seeds inside, you're going to want to harden those off. So for a week, each day, you're going to be putting those seedlings outside once they're a little bigger, maybe 2 to 3 inches, for longer and longer periods, so that they can get used to the cold weather. And so you'll have a bigger chance of success once they get planted in the ground. Okay, so like I was saying, you're going to harden off your homegrown starts. And so then you're going to gather what you need. You're going to get your trowel, your yardstick, your tape measure, if you want to be really precise about how you plant things in your garden. Are you a super neat gardener, or are you just kind of a little more fly by the seat of your pants? Either way is wonderful. If you want to cover things, we're going to talk a little bit too about covering things with tulle fabric. Get that together. Get your planting plan that you made up through the winter, and get your any transplant amendment that you're going to add to the planting holes like Sure Start or something like that. So mark your placement, get your soil nice and ready, moisten it, don't get it too wet, dig your holes, remove your starts from the pack, and then lightly loosen the roots, place them in the hole, cover them up with dirt, pack them in just a little bit, water thoroughly. And then at that point, add your supports. Even though your tomato plants or your cucumber plants or beans or whatever are tiny, add your supports at that time so you don't have to weave them through the metal or wood structure that you're going to add later. So adjust your irrigation if you have lines. Label. You think you're going to remember, but you might forget. I always label, but it's a great idea. It's a great idea. Cover with tulle fabric if you have trouble with birds, and then keep everything moist. Okay, so here's some tomato starts ready to go in. Here's a strawberry start that's going to be planted by some able hands. And here's some starts that are covered with a mesh cones and tulle fabric, if that's what you need. I have a gardener who swears by it, or you can tolerate a little bit of damage. It just depends on what your garden does. Okay, so here's some additional starts. Here's some of the beautiful basil plants that are grown kind of hydroponically that are available at Trader Joe's. They look so gorgeous, and then sometimes you get them into the garden and they're a little too top heavy, and so you kind of adjust those. But here's some beautiful corn, and here's some coffee starts. I don't know why you would be growing coffee. Probably to wake up, get some, drink some coffee to wake us up. Okay. Well, this might be Carrie after she's been working in the garden. Look at her knee. Okay. And then after all that work, ladies and gentlemen, get ready for your bounty. That's one of the beautiful things about summer is that you're overloaded, especially if you're growing any kind of zucchini or squash. Lots of friends and family to share with. I'm in Terra Linda, so if you have any extra, feel free to drop it by my place. But it's just a beautiful time to eat well and enjoy all the work that you've done. So in summary, with a little bit of preparation, you can set your garden up for success. Generally, prepare in the fall, plan in the winter, set the stage in spring. So everyone, we're setting the stage right now, and then eat up in the summertime. Any questions? And then I'm going to actually put this, here's our reference page, but then here's some information about the Master Gardener leaflet. I'll leave this up, I guess, just for a little bit. And let me see if I can access the chat.
I see the chat, but I don't see any questions. So if anyone has any questions, please submit them to the chat and I'll make sure we get an answer.
Oh boy, we're just in the nick of time. It's 56, so that was good.
Well,
so there's a question on fertilizing and amending. That's actually a really great question. And Janine and I are doing a presentation on fertilizers and amendments coming up. I think we're doing it. Janine, do you have the dates on those yet?
I
Yes.
believe that's May 19th.
Okay, great. May 19th, we're doing one, I think, with the Marin, and I think we're doing another one in San Anselmo, maybe May 6th.
Yeah.
May 6th at 1 o'clock. So we're going to get into a lot of detail about fertilizers and amendments and mulches and how everything works and the good ones to use. And it's super thorough.
And what's nice about that is that it goes over macro and micro nutrients and what each one does and why they perform differently. And, it's just a wonderful more sciencey refresher on successful strategies.
There is another question. Can you talk about the tool cap and do they help with cutter insects?
The tool?
The mesh caps that
Oh, yes,
Truly.
yes, yes. Yes, and do they help with what?
Cutter insects, Cutter.
Yes. Okay, so I have, I think that those covers are helpful. Of course, the number one thing is to make sure you don't trap critters inside, right? So you be pretty particular. And then you make sure that you kind of swivel it. If you're using a cap, swivel it so that it gets down at least a half an inch into the soil so it doesn't blow over, and also so they can't just crawl off. Cutters, I don't believe, are boring, right? So they're not going to go under. So it will definitely help with snails, cutters. Ants are tricky because they are underground. And then, of course, birds. So I think you would be setting yourself up for success by using those things, and with specifically against cutters for sure.
There is another question. One gardener has a hard time growing cucumbers, but has great success with zucchini. Why?
Are you planting them in different places? Are you planting them in the same area? I don't grow squash because there's too much of it. I do grow cucumbers, and I grow most of them in pots, great big containers, and they're prolific. I make sure that the soil is fresh in the container every year. Janine, I don't know if you grow them in the ground or not.
Yeah, I do grow them in the ground. And cucumbers are definitely a little more persnickety than squash anyway. And I'm trying to think back to the cultural requirements of each and why one squash, squash is a little hardier, although it needs rich soil too because it's a heavy feeder. Cucumbers are also heavy feeders. I guess I would try to make sure wherever you're planting your cucumbers that you've enriched that soil, and then I wouldn't put the cucumbers where you had recently put the squash. If that may be something, if you're rotating the cucumbers after the squash, might be something to
And
think
also,
about.
I think pollination, making sure that you have bees around. A lot of people they use the tool to cover some of those crops up with, and you can lose your pollination by eliminating the bees that way.
He says he plants them in the same area and always put compost and air out the soils before I plant them, and the bees are aplenty.
Yeah, I would rotate your cucumbers and your squash if you have the space to do it. If you don't have the space to do it, then I love the idea that you're adding a lot of compost.
I try switching varieties maybe too. There are a lot of different cucumber varieties. And if you keep buying the same variety and you're not having success, I'd switch it up and try something a little bit different. There, a lot of places will sell different cucumber varieties. You just have to seek them out. You might try that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Janine and Carrie, for all the great information just in time for this spring and the rain. So if we do a lot of work on Saturday, it'll
Right.
rain on it on Sunday, and then we will be all ready to go.
That
Exactly.
would be perfect. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you all for attending. And in about a week, if you came in late or want to watch it again, it'll be on the Marin County Free Library YouTube site. Bye-bye. And thank you all for attending.
Bye.
Bye-bye.